Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Caracas, Venezuela on July 27, 2024. I am currently in a large convention center where government officials have brought election observers from around the world. These are election observers from many different countries. For example, I was just speaking to one from Lebanon, numerous election observers from Europe, of course, all over Latin America, some from Southeast Asia. So it's quite a diverse collection of officials who've come here to observe the election at the invitation of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, which is the ruling party, the party of Hugo Chavez and the current Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The primary opponent of Nicolás Maduro in this election, which will be held tomorrow, Sunday, July 28th, is a gentleman by the name of Edmundo Gonzalez. He is the chosen candidate of a collection of opposition parties that have adopted the name the Democratic Unitary Platform. He was not their first choice. Their first choice, based upon a primary held last year, was a politician by the name of Maria Corina Machado. Maria Corina Machado has long been a favorite of the U.S. government, and in fact, all the way back during the administration of George W. Bush, she was warmly welcomed in Washington by President Bush around the time that he was in the process of destroying Iraq in a criminal war of aggression. And she's widely believed, certainly amongst the left in Latin America, to be of a far-right persuasion. And she was disqualified earlier this year after having won the primary of the Democratic Unitary Platform by the Venezuela Supreme Court, which of course Western media claim is controlled by President Maduro. Whether that's true or not, I think, is debatable. But in any event, she was disqualified because of her involvement with a character by the name of Juan Guaido, who was declared by Canada and other very U.S.-friendly states in Latin America back in 2019, January 2019, to be the interim president of Venezuela. And he purported to assume the role of interim president of Venezuela, even though he had never run to be the president of Venezuela and certainly had not won any election for the presidency. And the basis upon which this collection of states, Canada and U.S.-friendly states in Latin America, proclaimed him to be the interim president was Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution, which applies in situations where the president abandons, that's the term it uses, abandons his post, but there had been no abandonment. In fact, it was easily verifiable that President Maduro was exercising his functions, the office of the presidency, right up until the time of the declaration of this group of states called the Lima Group, that Juan Guaido was the interim president. So Guaido purported to be the interim president for several years. He became embroiled in a corruption scandal, and in late 2022, he was unceremoniously removed from this post by the opposition parties themselves, and then the U.S. government, and shortly after that, Canada, announced that they were no longer treating him as the interim president of Venezuela. So Machado was very closely allied with Guaido, and I think it's fair to say that her activities over the years raised serious questions about her respect for the Venezuelan Constitution and the democratic process in this country. Whatever you may think ultimately of her disqualification by the Supreme Court, the fact is that the United Opposition is running a candidate. He's presented Edmundo Gonzalez as a grandfatherly and benevolent figure by the Western press, but given his political leanings and associations, whether he is a person of that temperament remains to be seen. This will be the third election in which Nicolás Maduro has sought the presidency. He won the presidency for the first time in 2013 in a special election that was triggered by the untimely death from cancer of his predecessor, Hugo Chavez. Now, I understand from my conversations with many of the observers here and representatives of the PSUV, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, that the polls show rather contradictory results. Some show Edmundo Gonzalez winning by a wide margin. Others show the incumbent Nicolás Maduro prevailing comfortably. And yet others apparently show a very tight race. Apparently this is standard in Venezuelan politics. I'm told that the political opinion polling in this country is notoriously inaccurate and unreliable. So who knows? Privately, what I'm hearing is that the incumbent party is cautiously optimistic, but they're not certain of victory. They understand that there is a significant chance that they will lose this election. They're steeling themselves for that possibility, and if they do win, which they do expect, they do not, the people I've spoken to at any rate, for what it's worth, do not anticipate that will be a landslide. Now, we're already hearing noises in the Western press about electoral fraud. They are basically setting the table for allegations that the result is illegitimate. And by the way, it's not just Edmundo Gonzalez who's running. There are apparently about 10 candidates who are running in this election. Now, and if you hear these allegations of electoral fraud, and I'm sure you will hear them only if Edmundo Gonzalez wins, the West is not going to claim electoral fraud. I'm sorry, only if Edmundo Gonzalez loses. I'm quite sure that the West isn't going to question the integrity of the outcome if Edmundo Gonzalez wins. But if and when you hear these allegations, bear in mind that Jimmy Carter, whose organization observed over 90 elections, commented after it had acted as an observer in a recent Venezuelan election that of the over 90 elections in which it had participated as an observer entity, Venezuela had the most impressive system in terms of ensuring the integrity of the result and the transparency of the result. And in fact, in the short time that I've been here, I've tried to inform myself about the mechanics of the voting process in Venezuela's electoral system, and it is quite impressive. In order to vote, you have to present your national identity card. You register in advance. The identity card apparently has your fingerprint on it. And when you show up at the polling station, you're notified of the polling station. They will take you to a booth where you will vote electronically. And you're given 3 minutes, no more, no less, in order to cast your vote. And when the 3 minutes are up, the machine generates a paper ballot. The voter then verifies that the paper ballot generated by the machine reflects the choice that the voter adopted when using the machine, and then the voter themselves will deposit the paper ballot into a ballot box that is visible to everyone in the polling station. So all the representatives of political parties, the scrutineers, the election staff, they can all see the ballot box at all times. And then once the voting is over, there is extensive auditing done of various levels of the voting process on the same day. So this is done as a matter of course, not only if there are allegations of fraud, these extensive audits. And one of the things that they will do is they will verify that the electronic results accord with the paper ballots. And this is by no means a comprehensive explanation of all of the protections that have been built into the voting system in Venezuela. I think you can fairly take it from the former President Jimmy Carter that it is a robust system, and anybody suggesting that the outcome, whatever it may be, is the result of voter fraud should be called upon to produce hard evidence to support that allegation. Certainly they shouldn't be assumed to be correct. And as I said, I think you can almost assume that you're going to hear allegations of voter fraud if Nicolás Maduro does prevail. In any event, the president is scheduled to speak here shortly. I'm going to be listening to his speech with a translation headset because unfortunately my Spanish is not good enough for me to understand it. I will do my best to summarize for you once his speech is finished what the president-elect had to say. And by the way, campaigning is over. It ended, I understand, on Wednesday night when the government, the incumbent, Nicolás Maduro, held a massive rally in which I wasn't there, but other election observers were there. And they tell me there were hundreds of thousands of people who came out. But this is not a campaign event. It's a closed event, open only to these election observers from around the world. So as I say, when he's finished speaking, I'll come back to you with my summary of what he had to say. Also share with you some of the footage from his speech.
Patriotismo y lealtad. Venezuela, 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 bandera venezolana. Y ahí Venezuela, patriotismo y lealtad. Y el rojo de tu bandera que indica la libertad. Venezuela, 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 bandera venezolana. Tienes en todo tu pueblo una lámpara encendida. Venezuela, 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 bandera venezolana. Ay, Venezuela, viva Dios, viva la patria, viva Dios, viva la patria, viva la federación.
Cuando digo esto, lo digo porque lo conozco. El capitalismo salvaje, la extrema derecha, provoca convulsiones sociales y en Venezuela ha provocado más de un baño de sangre. Lo viví como joven, que sobreviví. Hoy entiendo, gracias a Dios, entiendo por qué sobreviví. Y todos los que pudimos sobrevivir. Más de 5.000 muertos hubo, embajadores. Y no hubo ONU, OEA, Almagro, ni ninguna de esas basuras de la época que dijera algo. El basural guardó silencio. Y otra vez, en su época, George Bush padre fue el primero que llamó a apoyar a Carlos Andrés Pérez en la masacre. El imperio gringo apoyó la masacre que hubo aquí. Fue dar la orden a las fuerzas policiales y militares de disparar en las calles. Y lo segundo que hizo fue firmar un decreto totalmente espurio para disolver la Asamblea Nacional del Parlamento, para disolver todas las gobernaciones, todas las alcaldías, el poder electoral, para disolver el poder judicial. Y se abrogó para sí todo el poder de la República. Eliminó el carácter de República Bolivariana de Venezuela y la volvió a nombrar República de Venezuela. Borró el cuadro histórico de Bolívar en el Salón Ayacucho. Sacaron su verdadera estirpe. Esas corrientes fascistas que ustedes ven por ahí, Milei, Bolsonaro, Álvaro Uribe, Iván Duque, nacieron aquí. La derecha venezolana extremista envenenó de radicalismo y fascismo a toda la derecha latinoamericana. Esos monstruos se amamantaron de las monstruas y los monstricos de aquí. Pedimos perdón por lo que nos corresponde. Por eso la responsabilidad nuestra en esta historia es grande. Y les puedo decir, veedores y veedoras, nosotros no somos gente cobarde ni débil. Nos han subestimado. Cuando el comandante Chávez partió, dijeron se acabó la revolución. Pero Chávez ya había dicho, Chávez no soy yo, Chávez eres tú, muchacho, mujer, hombre.
Venezuela, mi patria querida, quien la libertó mi hermano fue Simón Bolívar. ¡Coro, coro!
Viva Venezuela, mi patria querida, quien la libertó mi hermano fue Simón Bolívar.
Gracias a la providencia, demostró tener tan claro que el odio es de ser humano para nuestra independencia. Gracias a la providencia.
So that was just some of the commentary from President Nicolás Maduro on the evening before the Venezuelan election of July 28th. The speech actually lasted for approximately an hour. It was televised nationally. The president referred to the Venezuelan election at the outset of his speech as a world event. And indeed, given the role that Venezuela has played in the project of Chavismo and the conflict that this has generated with the United States government and its Western allies during the past 30 years, given also that Venezuela is strategically situated, geopolitically speaking, at the north of South America, the south of the Caribbean Sea, access to the Atlantic. It's an Andean nation, as the president observed. It has vast mineral wealth, including the world's largest oil resources. If in fact there is a change of government to one that would undoubtedly be very friendly to the United States and would adopt a much more neoliberal orientation, that would have very significant implications for geopolitics, perhaps for many years to come. So this is indeed, I think, as the president observed last night, a historic speech. And by the way, it is actually election day today. I didn't have time to complete my report when I left the convention center yesterday. We'll be heading out to the polling stations briefly. Reports are already coming in that there are vast lineups to get into the polling stations in Caracas, but I'll have more to say about that later. Until then, I want to just elaborate on what the president had to say last night, and also who was present. To the right of the president throughout the speech was seated the vice president of the country, Delcy Rodriguez. She's also the economy minister, and she has been described to me by a couple of people who know her personally as the brains of the operation. The president began his speech by reviewing the history of Venezuela in some detail, and he talked first and foremost about the indigenous peoples of this land and how they had lived in harmony with the natural world and had been largely exterminated by the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire, he noted, had kidnapped approximately 100,000 Africans and brought them to Venezuela between the 1500s and the early 1800s. The slave population here rebelled at various times. It became known as the Maroon Movement, and a famous figure by the name of Rey Miguel led a major slave revolt in what is now Venezuela hundreds of years ago. Of course, the president had a great deal to say about Simón Bolívar, who led what is now Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Panama, and Bolivia to independence from the Spanish Empire. He repeatedly condemned the IMF, the Organization of American States, and of course the United States. I couldn't count the number of times he used the word gringos in the course of his speech. He referred to Juan Guaidó as a puppet, a fool, and an idiot. And at one point in his speech, he held up a little copy of the Venezuelan Constitution to drive home the point that the efforts to install Guaidó as the interim president were violative of the Venezuelan Constitution. He talked at some length, of course, about United States sanctions. He said that this had caused scarcity in the country of 80%, an astonishing figure, and annual inflation in excess of 100,000%. And he lauded the Venezuelan people for having endured the hardships occasioned by United States sanctions. He highlighted at the same time that recently Venezuela's devastated economy has rebounded to some degree. In 2022, it experienced GDP growth of 8%, which would put any Western country to shame. And last year, in 2023, a very robust 4% in GDP growth, and the international organizations forecast GDP growth in 2024 of 4.5%. Again, quite robust growth relative to virtually any Western country. Some recent historical figures he praised, not surprisingly, were Fidel Castro. He also talked about the leftist Chilean leader who was overthrown in a coup decades ago, Salvador Allende. In a moving moment, he said that he thought quite a bit about Salvador Allende when he himself felt his life was at threat in his capacity of Venezuela's president, given the attempts to overthrow the government by means of violence. He also, interestingly, thanked Russian President Vladimir Putin and the people of Russia for the assistance they gave to Venezuela and Venezuelans in overcoming the COVID pandemic. And what I found interesting was a good bit of the final part of his speech was devoted to the voting process in Venezuela. He actually explained step by step the mechanics of the voting process, and he talked at length about the various guarantees against voter fraud. And I think for obvious reasons he did this, because already the Western press is making prognostications that there's going to be voter fraud. If the opposition candidate loses, that's undoubtedly what's going to be alleged. But as I indicated at the outset of this report, unless there's hard evidence to back it up, any such claim should be treated with a very high degree of skepticism, because as Jimmy Carter himself noted, and by the way, President Maduro quoted Jimmy Carter last night, Venezuela has, if not the most robust and transparent voter protection system in the world. It's certainly one of the best. And he even mentioned President Maduro that Colombian paramilitaries had crossed the border into Venezuela with the intention of sabotaging some infrastructure that was essential to the operation of the electronic voting system. I don't know whether these allegations are true or not, but obviously he believes them to be true. At least that was my impression. And the final thing he had to say, and this was something he repeated over and over again at the end of his speech, he talked about peace. And he said, whatever the outcome of this election or whatever the intentions of Venezuela's enemies will be, there will be peace on voting day, and there will be a peaceful transition to the next government, whoever may win. So that was, in a nutshell, what President Maduro had to say. There was, I think, a lot of love and appreciation in the audience of over 900 election observers from around the world. And today we'll be heading out, as I indicated shortly, to the polling stations in Caracas. And we should know the outcome of this election at around 10 p.m. this evening. I'll have further reporting to do during the course of the day when I have time away from my election observer responsibilities. For now, this is Dimitri Lascaris signing off on Election Day in Venezuela on July 28, 2024.